I'm Sophia DeBraccio, and do you know who America's blonde bombshell is? Because it's Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was born June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles, California, the heart of Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe was known as a very well-known actress and model, and you could say an iconic character within the sexual era in the 1950s. Marilyn Monroe was just like you and me. Marilyn Monroe struggled from when she was the age of only knows as a child to where she succeeded to and eventually passed away. Marilyn Monroe is someone who did struggle just like you and me to the fact that she came from nothing and she became something. Marilyn Monroe had a troubled childhood. Marilyn Monroe was bouncing from foster home to foster home, which can get hard for a child, as well as she went to a total of 9 different schools growing up, which is not ideal for anybody. With that being said, the amount of travel she did, Marilyn Monroe ended up having over 50 different addresses, and that alone is hard to take in. After 36 years, Marilyn Monroe did eventually end up owning her own house. She finally had something to say is hers and is her home. She had somewhere where she felt safe, no more needing to travel, and a place that she could be herself in. With that being said, that home was not as beautiful as you would think. That home life was a broken home life, given the relationship she had at the time. Marilyn Monroe married Arthur Miller June 1956. And throughout their marriage, these two were beautiful together and they were lovebirds. But towards the end, they did have disagreements on each other's lifestyles and the things that they would and would not want to pursue. With that being said, Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller did have a divorce in 1960. But before then, they both lived in this beautiful home, a very beautiful two-story, typical American dream. But with that being said, they both wanted it to also be their own as well as be the American dream home. So they called in a professional, as I read, Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright took what they had to say and their personal traits and came up with a bunch of ideas to make the house more elaborate and extravagant. But this is not what the couple wanted. They wanted something that was more simple, more home and family-like, not something that you can invite your co-workers in and they would give a care if you had money or not. Mr. Wright specifically wanted to add drops in the living room to the point where he had columns all around, making it look like a domed-in coliseum. Well, the couple wanted their home to be as simple as could be. With that being said, they actually rejected Mr. Wright and any ideas that came through. Instead, Miller did what he could to be a self-efficient husband within the home and would fix things up as they wanted and DIY, you could say. Marilyn Monroe, on the other hand, she did not care for the typical wife life. Within that era, the 1950s, the wives were the ones who cooked and cleaned and stayed home to provide the care for family, while the husbands did the work around the house and went to work physically to provide. Well, Marilyn Monroe did not see the pattern in her perspective and see that it was best fitting for her. With that being said, Marilyn Monroe actually went off and started pursuing herself and her self-image. And this is where she spiked up in her career, and this is where she got from here to there. She actually was so pursued with herself to the point where Miller didn't think he had to show her that affection and that attention anymore. These two lifestyle disagreements is what caused them to have that divorce. But besides that, Marilyn Monroe did eventually go off and buy her elaborate, extravagant Hollywood house for over $77,000. With that being said, Marilyn Monroe found this house specifically, given that that house was a fortress where she could feel safe from the world, quote unquote, is what she stated. Hollywood is a place that she hated dearly, and it burnt her out to the point where she ended up taking her own life on August 4th, 1962. Marilyn Monroe, actually on the runway, on the red carpet, and within the movies, was your dumb blonde, your childlike voice, the girl who had the jiggle breast and the too wide hips, and her body and her self-image was picked at so hard that it picked at her head more than it should have. With that being said, Marilyn Monroe was a burnt out actress who, at the end of the day, was suffering from her own mental health. It did not help that she had a family that had a past of mental disorders, but within that era, it was not determined how to fully treat these disorders other than hospitalizing that human being. And that is not something she was going to do, given all the fame and all the life that she has. She sucked it up to a point where she couldn't anymore. Lastly, Marilyn Monroe is a human being who struggled just like you and I. She is a human being who came from nothing and got to something. She is a human being that provided for herself no matter what anyone had to say. And with that being said, no one, celebrity or a person on the side of the street, should be discriminated for that. Marilyn Monroe was a person who would get discriminated for who she was, even though she was the one inspiring us to be confident and be who we are today, as everyone looks back at her and idolizes her for being a woman in this era, being a woman in America who acted the way she acted. Marilyn Monroe is a person just like you and me, and that is something that we need to leave with.